Morning, everyone. How can I speak to people who are half alive and half asleep? People with hoodies up who are feeling warm and fuzzy underneath, bound to doze off. Okay, no, I don't really speak like that, but I figured I got to get you awake somehow. I used to teach at university. Taught first hour intro to philosophy, 8 a.m. It was evil. There were 83 students in there. But I would often begin the class with my old Gandalf impression. If you do not study, you shall pass. So, that's the main thing. That's the main thing you're here to do. All right, enough of that business. Guys, I'm not getting any. Okay, I have to lift a leg when I do this. I have to point it this way. Okay, we've got 4 messages in this series, and what we're going to do is try to talk you through big changes that are happening in the world and the responses that we need to make as the body of Christ, as a missionary force, to get out there and mesh with the changes that our God is doing in the world. It's pretty cool, some pretty amazing stuff. This morning, we're talking about marketplace ministry. We're talking about tent making, what's happening in different places of the world. I'll give you a biblical model for it. And then we're also, this afternoon, talking about what God is doing in Indonesia. Guys, 600,000 to 800,000 people coming to faith in Christ every year in Indonesia. It's the largest Muslim country in the world. They're going nuts there. Wonderful things happening. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., we're talking about the dialogue with doubt, the skepticism and atheism that you face if you're going to be a missionary in Europe, if you're going to be a missionary in the United States. You're going to run into problems with atheism, agnosticism, apatheism. I don't really care whether there's a God or not. And then the last one is a threefold cord. We're going to be looking at kind of a cousin concept of social justice. How do we look at this from a biblical standpoint? How do we focus on the gospel while doing and mimicking what Jesus did in his ministry, aside from the whole miracle thing, which is really hard to reproduce, but, we'll try our best. Okay? So those are the 4 messages. You can't stop water with a fork. All right, let's close in prayer. No. But as water passes through the fork, it's going to change form and it's going to look different. You can't stop the gospel. You can't stop gospel ministry with government interference and intrusion. But as the gospel ministries pass through the fork of governmental regulation and intrusion, it's going to look different. In the old days, we used to talk about the 1040 window, the homes of Islam, Buddhism, and Hinduism, how it was hard to get into those countries. But something took place. We're not quite sure what. I'm trying to nail it down. Something happened in the UN about 9 years ago. Somebody got up and proposed a visa scheme that countries could adopt to keep businesses coming in and keep religious zealots out. And basically what has happened is most of the countries in the world are adopting a scheme where you get 1 3-year volunteer religious worker visas. Non-renewable. That's it. You got 3 years. So if you're going to be a church planter, that makes it really, really tough. In order to get permanent residence, you got to get a work visa, and there are a number of hoops you have to jump through. For this reason, we have missionaries who have been more than a decade in Sweden who are approached by government officials and said, you got 30 days to get out of the country. Scotland, same thing. South Africa, same thing. It's happening all over the world. It's not just the 1040 window anymore. Changes are happening all around us. In addition to that, there is the disappearing missions major. Bible colleges are closing. Bible colleges to survive are morphing into liberal arts colleges. Nothing wrong with this. In fact, it kind of lines up with what God is doing in other places, oddly enough. But it's interesting. It's traumatizing. We cannot have a missions mindset, guys, that is 1950. Some American churches have a missions mindset that is 1850. They're still thinking that way. They're still thinking the world looks that way. And it doesn't. The world is changing dramatically. And so with the missions majors disappearing, we're like, okay, well, what's going to happen? No problem. Millennials got it sorted out because they're still very eager to rock the world with the gospel and to live on purpose for Christ. We actually, this is bizarre, as a mission, we have actually started recruiting at University of Georgia. Go Dogs. You say, that's weird. Yeah, we're in this recruiting hall with IBM, Sperry Rand, all these people, trying to recruit business majors. And we set up, it's kind of embarrassing, Biblical Ministries Worldwide, which we need to kind of get a new name, like Cross World or Avant, something cool. We're working on it. We just haven't gotten there if you have any ideas. But so we set it up. 18 students signed up for vision trips, internships, everything else. They're Christians out there in secular colleges, at Purdue, all over the U.S. They want to live life on mission. And so we're scratching our heads saying, okay, not missions, but mission. Okay, what does that look like? And so that's one of the reasons I'm talking to you about tent making this morning. Another factor, whether or not you like this guy, and I won't even go there, the fact is there is a rising anti-American sentiment overseas. Not only do we have the visa hoops, not only do we have the increasing costs, but we also have now recriminations against Americans. Well, we're going to restrict you entering our country. It used to be you had an American passport, you kind of get in anywhere. Not so anymore. It's like you're keeping our people out, we're going to keep your people out. And so targeting missionaries, denying visas, and anti-American sentiment. There's also a shift in who is doing missions. The numbers, depends on who you read, but the numbers of vocational missionaries since the 90s is down about 34% since we joined, okay? Meanwhile, at the same time, tent-making missionaries are up 600%. Patrick Lai estimates, a guy who wrote a book on the topic, that are about 60,000 Christians living overseas on mission. So they got jobs. I have a daughter teaching, she and her husband teaching English in China. But there are people all around them teaching English but living on mission for the sake of the gospel. In addition to that, the number of foreign missionaries is on the increase. So American missionaries, for all our faults and for all our colonialist ideas, we did get the gospel out. And we did train some leaders. And they're catching the idea, and so they're actually starting to get out. Now, you see these letters I put in front of you, R is in red. The Brics Countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, Korea, that's South Korea, and South Africa. Russia's sending out a few missionaries, but not on the scale that the other Brics countries are. Actually, also the Philippines, but nobody can say Brics, so that sounds really dumb, If you can come up with a better acronym, I'll buy it, but I just haven't been able to find it. So these countries are sending out missionaries now. And when we went out to the country, we went out to South Africa, this is what it looked like. American missionaries were 80% of what was happening in church planting around the world. Now, it's the opposite. So I'm not going to stand here at a missions conference and say, if we don't get out there and share the gospel, they're never going to hear. Bunk. You will be privileged, you will be lucky as an American if you can even have a piece of the pie. The church around the world is going nuts, guys. They are on fire. So I'm saying here at Calvary University, you need to get some fire in you as well. Otherwise, we will lose our birthright. You say, oh no, not America. Oh yeah? Look at Scotland. Look at England. Look at any of the European countries, the great missionary sending countries of 100 years ago. Good luck with that. Try to plant a church in England or Scotland. It's going to be a long haul for you. These are the seats of atheism and skepticism. The church is shutting down, and mosques springing up. And we have passed the baton. We might be in danger of losing the baton and dropping out of the race if we don't take these things to heart. So I'm really trying to speak to all of you. I don't really care what your major is. Let me give you some ideas to think about. So imagining missions differently. One of the things we're doing is, like I said, this is Garrett Helmick. He joined BMW from University of Georgia. He plays bagpipes. He's going to Scotland, but he graduated in marketing. And he got a job with IBM. He's with BMW and he's with IBM. Is that possible? It's possible. They're called Tentmakers. And he's going overseas to Scotland, a dark place, in order to make a difference. How about this guy, Ricky Gimmel? His name isn't Ricky Gimmel, and no, this isn't his picture, because I can't show you the picture, because I'd have to kill you, and that kind of stuff. We're being recorded. Ricky Gimmel, goat breeding in Indonesia. You say, that's really weird. Yeah, it takes on all different kinds of forms. But Indonesians had really skinny, scrawny goats. It was a shame. So he thought, well, I've seen these boar goats in Indiana. So he imported a whole bunch of boar goats on a boat. He's become like a folk hero on the island of Java on the east side. And he's also led about 320 people to Christ and is involved with 8 church plants in the middle of a goat breeding operation. Tent making. Every business, one boss, Scotty Freeze, graduated from Northland with a degree in sacred music. Good luck trying to find a job with that one. But he knew all things Apple. And his mother was a Scot, so an EU citizen, at least for a little while longer. And so he said, I can get a job. And so we had a church plant in Luxembourg. He went over, interviewed with iTunes Luxembourg, did an internship. They hired him, full pay, full benefits. And now, because iTunes is moving to Ireland, he jumped on board with Amazon. But he runs a young professionals Bible study. He leads the music and the worship at the church. And when the main church planter is gone, he does the preaching. Beautiful. Classic. He's our poster boy for tent making. And in case, guys, you think you're panicked, that you might graduate from Calvary without a girl, he graduated from Northland without a girl. Katie graduated from Bob Jones without a guy. And she got a job as an au pair in Paris. And he was in Luxembourg. And so they fell in love under the Eiffel Tower. Their first kiss was in Paris. Ah, come on. You can get a really good life in missions, all right? I'm just telling you. Okay, for those of you who like diagrams, let's look at the big picture. Missio Dei, the mission of God. Our God is a missional God. He is working out his mission through nature, nations, miracles, and the church to build his kingdom. As part of that, the Father sent the Son to be the Savior of the world. And so as the Son was finishing up his ministry, he said, as the Father has sent me, so I am sending you. That was the Great Commission. We're all familiar with that. So mission, this idea of the Great Commission, is every believer living and speaking out the gospel to expand and strengthen God's kingdom. So I stayed at Quality Inn in Belton last night. Whew, wow, what a great experience. And I hadn't had dinner, so I went next door to the Waffle House. Now, I have had many cross-cultural experiences in my life, but I have never been to a Waffle House, ever. So I went in, and I was wearing kind of this cool vest thing, a waistcoat or something, and the guy was like, nice clothes. I would wear those if I had a job. I said, welcome to Waffle House, man. And so we got talking. Well, his dad went here, Calvary University. And he's walked a broader path, but he professes Christ. He's been on a couple of mission trips. So I got to talk. We talked for like an hour and a half at Waffle House last night. It was cool. And we talked about this concept, living life on mission. It doesn't matter. You can be flipping eggs at Waffle House, and you're living life on mission. I was in full-time Christian service in the marketplace as a lawyer in Philadelphia. That's the way I viewed it. I was able to lead the township zoning officer to the Lord. It was fun. Everybody in this room, if you are a Jesus follower, you are called to live your life on mission. Okay? Everybody. So a mission conference isn't just about missions. It's about mission. It's about sharing Christ no matter where you are. Every single one of you. And I'll be pushing your buttons on that score several times. But then there's also a group. Jesus talked about, become my disciples. That was good. But then he talked about other people. He said there are those who will leave houses and lands and mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters for the gospel's sake and for my sake. It's interesting. He was seeing that there were those who would leave and move cross-culturally to do this. And so this is the business of the church, the local church, sending out commissioned leaders. Commissioned leaders. not guilt trips on teenagers. So when I'm here speaking to all of you at the Bible College, I'm also trying to recruit your faculty and your administration. Dr. Cohn here? I'm watching you, buddy. Okay. He's got a good, secure job here, but there are places where we can use you. Okay. Next point. So missions is this work of the churches, the local churches. So if you say, oh, I want to join BMW, I'm going to say, what does your pastor say? What does your local church say? Are you ready to go? We want to know what they say, not what you say. And we want to see what kind of ministry you've already been involved in. Because it's about churches sending out qualified leaders. Okay? So now the interesting thing with tent making is that these two combine. Because you've got vocational missionaries out there commissioned by local churches. But you've also got tent makers. Those are people just living on mission. In some cases, they're commissioned. But in other cases, they just moved overseas and they're doing a bang-up job. So what I'm saying here is that this missions conference is not safe for any of you. I am speaking to all of you. You're like, no, you're not going to get me to change to a missions major. I don't really care whether you change to a missions major. I don't really care if there is one at all. The fact is there are ESL, nursing, business, physical therapy. There are all kinds of majors. You can use that overseas and move cross-culturally. So that's why I'm talking about marketplace ministry. When do we get out of here? Now? An hour?
Yeah, you got lots of time.
Dude. Okay. Well, we have time for questions and all that kind of stuff. I'm still on Eastern time, so I'm seeing the wrong thing. So, what I did, I left the practice of law. I had 7 years in law. It was great. It was financially rewarding. It was intellectually stimulating. But my wife and I were leaning on the door of missions, just waiting. We were at a church in Pennsylvania that sent out 10 families to the mission field in 12 years. It was scary. A church of 900, so it was a big one. But missions conference would come, and we were all like, it's you, baby. You're going this year. You know. And a lot of our friends got up and left. That created a great kind of peer pressure, morale, to be ready to serve the Lord wherever, whenever, doing whatever he called you to do. But I'm not asking you necessarily to consider leaving your career to go on mission. I'm saying bring your career with you. So what I'm going to do this morning is we're going to look at a couple that was involved in gospel ministry in 3 major cities, 3 different church plants, and yet they never went into vocational ministry. We're in Acts chapter 18. Acts chapter 18. We're looking at Aquila and Priscilla. In real life, their names are Aquila and Prisca. And the nickname for Prisca is Priscilla. But that's all just really painful to say in English, so we just call them Aquila and Priscilla. Now you see here, location is in Corinth. The time is autumn 50 to spring 52. You're like, how can you be that certain? It's interesting, Gallio is mentioned in the passage. And we know from a number of resources, secular and Christian, when exactly Gallio came to power. And so it creates a time frame that's fairly easy to discern, fairly easy to look at. Okay, so Acts 18, verses 1 to 4. After this, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth, and he found a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome. And he went to see them, and because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them and worked, for they were tent makers by trade. And he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath and tried to persuade Jews and Greeks. Let's have a word of prayer. Father, thank you. You see us gather here in Kansas City. And Father, you said, your son told us a couple of times recorded in the Gospels to pray for the Lord of harvest to send forth laborers into his harvest. And you also said through Paul that we are co-laborers together with you in this business of the harvest. So I pray, Father, that you see the souls gathered here. I pray for the filling of the Holy Spirit. I pray to speak the power of the Word and the power of the Spirit. But Father, it's only you that stir and challenge hearts. And there may be some here, Father, that you call today. There may be some where the ideas just kind of stick in their mind and you'll call them in their 30s or in their 40s. But I pray by your grace that you would challenge, convict, confront some maybe who are laboring, planning to labor for that which perishes. And I pray that you would steer them toward living on mission. And I ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so first thing they did was watch bivocational ministry, and then they got involved. It says that after this, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth. This is really different. This is like, I don't know, imagine a sleepy college town. So New Haven, Connecticut, if you've been there, Yale University, just kind of, nice and quiet. And then going to Las Vegas. That's what going from Athens to Corinth is. Corinth was a very different place. It was unlike any place that Paul had ever been. And he actually got a little bit rattled. So, point here, a couple of points. The city is not a fun place to live. But the city is where the people are. And city is where typically people are open to new and crazy ideas, like your ideas, like the gospel. Here's where we get into the 1950 and 1850 view of missions. You tend to view people who are missionaries, if I say, oh, we're missionaries in South Africa, everybody's picturing, skin-clad shields and people living in the bush. Well, you got 10 million people in Johannesburg. Or go to Shanghai, 20 million people. Or go to Rio, 24 million. So you go to these, and you realize as you travel around, people have left the countryside and people have moved to the cities. The percentage of people living in the cities is much higher than it was 100 years ago. It's one of the dangers, actually, that we have working out in the rural areas, because if you train somebody in speaking English or computer skills as part of your church planting project, they leave and go to the cities to get jobs. And so you've actually hurt yourself by giving them these job skills. But the city is where the people are. I find most Americans don't want to go to the cities. We love our comfortable suburban middle-class life. We don't want it to be too expensive. There's a graduate out of here, Matthew Bates, I believe, right? Did he come to Calvary? He did come to Calvary. Raising $9,000 a month or $10,000 to go to Denmark. And we'll talk about Denmark tomorrow morning. Tough place. But expensive place. If you raise money, if you raise support to go to the cities, if you live in the bush, you can go for, really, really cheap. Your support schedule will be low and you'll be out in the field in no time. But it's just there's not many people out there. But the cities are evil places. The cities are loud places. Cities are hard places to raise your family. And so it seems that a lot of missionaries are looking for a place where it can be nice for them. And they don't want to go to the cities. But the truth is, we got to get in there and we got to mix it up with people. We have a family that recently joined. They're actually from Thailand, but they're going back to Thailand. They're going to Bangkok. Because Thailand, everybody goes to Thailand, they go out in the rural areas, but nobody's reaching Bangkok. And so they have a heart to reach the city. You are presenting the gospel. The gospel is a major shift in the worldview for a lot of people. They're going to be, typically, people are more open to change when they have experienced change. So when you get into small towns or you get into rural areas where everybody knows everyone, very hard for the gospel to take root there, unless it's brought normally by locals. If you come in as a foreigner, very difficult to get started. So it says he found a Jew named Aquila and his wife Priscilla. Come on, boys. Where are you? There you go. Aquila had already moved cross-culturally. Let me get the map here. Right up there, Pontus. That's where he was from. Now, the cool thing, you're like, okay, well, Pontus, whatever. At Pentecost, people from Pontus were there in Jerusalem. When Peter got up and he was preaching at Pentecost, there were people, they said, how is it that we all of us hear the glorious works of God in our own languages? People from Pontus were there. Many years later, Peter wrote the letter to the dispersed Christians, first on the list in 1 Peter 1:1, to those in Pontus. So Pontus was kind of a small community, a pocket of early Christianity. Not a bad place to live. You see a little mosque down there, right down there. Okay, guys. Not going to work. Doesn't show up. Need to get a big laser. Burn the screen. So he had recently come to Corinth with his wife Priscilla. Now, Priscilla is an amazing woman. This is the only husband and wife team that is mentioned. Wow, guys, you're jumping all over the place. Did we just jump several screens? The only husband and wife mentioned in the New Testament as a team, a ministry team. I like that. It's really awesome, and I think quite powerful, and that's why I'm kind of halt and limp, because I don't have my wife with me today. She's wonderful. In ancient mythology, it was told that among all of the angels, which were male, there would be 7 angelas that would visit the earth over the ages. My wife is the 7th. Every time I hug her, I'm feeling for wings. She's got them tucked in. I can't seem to find them, but she's amazing. So husband and wife team, she may have been the stronger. Go women. Because out of the 6 times that they're mentioned, Priscilla comes first 4 times, Priscilla and Aquila, Aquila's like, I'm keeping up, dear, So struggling. She was quite a woman, really good in ministry. And their job was tent making, so they both did business, and they both did ministry. It's interesting that they had already been persecuted, perhaps. The passage mentions that they were kicked out of Rome. We know from secular history this took place in 49 AD, so we're talking like 18 months earlier than this passage took place. The Roman historian Suetonius, writing about 70 years after the event, said, because the Jews at Rome caused continuous disturbances at the instigation of one called Chrestus. And many people think that's Christus, the guy he was writing 70 years later. Claudius expelled them from the city. Fascinating, and I love this. And here's another, I'm sticking it to you again. The church at Rome was started, pretty much from what we can tell, without any leadership. Apostle Paul hadn't been there from what we could tell. Peter wasn't there. Nobody was there. The church at Rome, like the church at Antioch, was planted by transformed believers who were just traveling on business and just starting to lead people to Christ. And they came apparently to the Jewish synagogue there, and they said, Mashiach has come. His name is Yeshua, and this and this and this. And then there was this back and forth, and apparently riots broke out in the city. Sometimes the gospel does that. And Claudius just got sick of this problem, this battling over this person named Chrestus. And so he said, all of you, get out of the city. So imagine, they had to leave, pick up their business, and they had to move. The good thing was tent making is a fairly mobile business. So Paul does tent making with them for a while. It is unclear exactly where Paul learned tent making. We can guess it was probably when he was a child. Maybe his father did some tent making. He learned it as a trade in his early years. But later on, he ends up getting trained under Gamaliel. Paul knew multiple languages. He obviously knew the Old Testament well. And when he got up on Mars Hill in Acts 17, impressive. He referenced 7 different Greek philosophers, quoted 2 of them. So this guy was well-read and spirit-led. Paul was. Where he learned tent making, we don't know. The point here is that every degree is a key. And that's what I'm pushing you. From the life of Paul, you realize that he got into places because he could speak multiple languages, or he had training in this or in that. I know that school maybe is not that fun. And I know you wonder, well, how am I going to use this? And I wonder what's going to happen in my life in the future. Just don't worry. Just keep plowing. Every certification you can get, every degree that you can get is a key. And they'll open doors that you'd be surprised at. And it's a little bit of a shame to say it, but when my wife and I, we were equipped and trained for ministry in the local church at a place called Limerick Chapel in Pennsylvania. When we joined BMW and were going out on deputation in 1994, I had 4 beautiful little kids, and I had my golden girl, my wife, and that's all wonderful. But I was a lawyer. But I would get up and speak in front of a church in order to raise support, and not once, guys, not once, did a pastor ask me, so have you studied theology at all? What makes you qualified to go plant a church? They didn't care because I was a lawyer. That's weird, isn't it? It is weird. Say, yeah, it's weird. Right. So I had learned ministry, and I guess I could speak well, and so it was like, well, you can get the job done, you're a lawyer. That's really sad. It's a bit of an indictment on our supporting churches. God bless them. But nonetheless, when you get degrees, people add credibility to you, maybe that you shouldn't have. A lot of guys I've met who've got PhDs are just saying, the best thing about my PhD is that it's behind me and done. I don't want to talk about it. Can I read it? No, I don't want you to read it. I'm trying to put it out of my mind. But people give you this credibility. So get your certifications. Whatever you're doing. If you can go online and get an ESL certification, do that. Because it's a ticket to get into places otherwise left closed. Plus, if you're going to teach in an elementary school, junior high, or high school, it'll get you $5,000 extra pay normally. So, not bad. So equip yourselves now in these early years. Your 20s are your years for your decade for educating yourself, getting degrees out of your way. Don't wait like me to your 50s to try to keep on doing grad work. It's painful. The best tent makers today work in teams. Patrick Lai said he did interviews with more than 400 tent makers. He said 93% of tent makers out there work on teams. Oftentimes, if you're a Christian working alone in a city, you have no vocational missionaries around, you have no team, you tend to wither and die on the vine, and you get discouraged. When you have a team to meet with, 93% of them said they did. 81% said they met once a week. 67% were accountable to the team's leader at least once a month for what they were doing. It's easy to lose mission, and a lot of mission agencies that have tent makers are giving us this feedback. It's so easy to get busy in business. Particularly if you're in a place like Japan or South Korea or whatever, the work weeks there are like nuts, like 48 hours on average. So business people are working 60 hours a week. To try to do ministry, you're just wiped out by the end of the week. So it's very hard to do that. But if you work in teams and you try to, keep each other accountable and encouraged, things go much better. So Paul is working with Aquila and Priscilla. My belief is that Aquila and Priscilla were probably believers already. Does not say that he tried to lead them to Christ or share the gospel with them. It seems that he found them, they were tent makers, and they were already believers. And like, woo, cha-ching, this works. I'm going to stay with these people, and I'm going to learn about this city. So Paul worked temporarily in this trade. Be careful. There are different kinds of tent makers. There's not one kind of tent maker. Paul was what we call a job taker. So he took a job, kind of a part-time job, and he was still reasoning out there in the marketplace, reasoning in the synagogue, getting in trouble. But he had this part-time job with Aquila and Priscilla, who were doing it full-time. So Paul's motivations for tent making are several. Fascinating one here in this passage. If you look, in verse 9 and 10. Some of you have Bibles with red letters, don't you? See something different there? I always liked red letters when I was a kid. Of course, I wasn't a very bright kid, but it was like, whoa, it's red. I used to like to look at Matthew 5, 6, and 7 because the whole page was red. I was easily amused as a kid, but not many red letters in the book of Acts. Red letters means that God or Jesus is speaking. Actually, Jesus is speaking. And you got two verses. It's going along in the narrative saying this happened, and then Jesus appears to Paul. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. Hello? Something happened there. Paul got rattled. Fascinating. There are a couple of passages where he asked people to pray for him that he would speak the gospel boldly as he ought to. And you kind of wonder, we picture Paul as this bombastic, never, no fear of anybody, just shooting it straight from the heart, from the hip, from the word. But it wasn't always the case. Later on, when Paul writes to the Romans, he says, "Greet Aquila and Priscilla, who risked their lives, risked their necks for my life's sake, to whom not only I give thanks, but all the churches. Something happened. Perhaps it got a bit rough in Corinth, where he was getting some pushback, or just getting beaten up, or people actually trying to kill him, where Aquila and Priscilla maybe hit him out. Something happened. So Corinth was a very different experience for Paul. It's the first place he's going to stay for like a full 18 months. This is kind of a pagan city. So it's fascinating because Paul's sermon in Acts 17 is much more like the sermons we can give in modern cities, because there were no people who knew about the scriptures. He's speaking to secular Greek philosophers. And so he's taking a whole different approach. Very interesting model he switches in Acts 17. Now when you come to Acts 18, you're also seeing a model of kind of what modern missionaries do. We have to take more time because we're fighting an uphill battle against this evil. And so Paul's taking the time to kind of analyze the culture and to kind of settle himself down. And it's nice to have a bit of a cover, like a job. He also wanted to support himself, to do gospel ministry without charge. He mentions this in several passages. He also wanted to set an example of Christ-honoring work. There are several countries that you go into. If you go in as a vocational missionary, if you're allowed to, you go in and they're like, you're in your house almost every day. Like you don't go to a regular job. CIA. They're CIA. That's what they are. They're CIA. Well, I'm with a mission organization. Yeah, but you're also CIA. Hard to convince them of anything else, And I'm talking Scandinavia. Scandinavia, they're like, so you don't work? What is this? Are you not giving back to society? You're mooching on society. No, I'm actually paid by, a foreign organization. To do what? You don't do anything. You sit around your house all day. Okay, better go get a job. So, yeah, we want to set an example of work. We also want to be able to help the needy, which is cool, a little bit of social justice idea here. We wanted to have money, but also to pass that money on to other people, to help the poor and needy in the community. Maybe there are others that we could mentor in tent making and get them set up in their job, their work as well. But Paul was interested in giving to those who were poor. We feel that it gives us greater contact with non-believers. That's from our standpoint. Paul didn't have to worry about that so much. And when you get in a setting, like if you get in an African town or an African village, you don't have to worry about making contacts. Europeans, where whites hang out, it tends to be very individualist, and it's hard to make friends, hard to make relationships. Johannesburg, we had a 6-foot-high wall with 6 strands of electric fence around our whole property. Hard to get know your neighbors. Hi there. Oh, sorry. But when you get into more of the areas like 2/3 of the world lives, it's easy to build relationships. But tent making actually helps to get you next to non-believers. I know a guy who went in on kind of volunteer mission work in Turkey. He was in Istanbul. And after about 2 years there as a volunteer, he knew his visa was going to run out. He started thinking and started making contacts, and now we're being recorded, so now let's just say he is an importer of foreign goods. And he had to come back to America, and he had to clean up his presence on the internet. It took about 14 months. He had published a Christian book. He had to unpublish it, so he had to get his name taken off the book. And so if you Google his name now, it just comes up that he's an importer working in Ankara, Turkey. So that's not easy to do. So he actually made the shift from vocational into tent making. And he's got contacts high up in the government. Fortunately, with the attempted coup, he didn't know any of the wrong people, so he's still there. All right. And then we also need creative ways to access areas closed to vocational missions. Still a lot of countries that are closed. We were in China a couple of weeks ago visiting my daughter. I had to sign all kinds of affidavits to the Chinese government that I wouldn't do anything tied in with my occupation with Biblical Ministries Worldwide. Because I've been teaching. I had to list everywhere I had been in the last 3 years. So, I've been in New Zealand and South Africa and Jordan. I was teaching apologetics in Jordan. They don't like anybody who's been to the Middle East. So I had to make all kinds of promises to the Chinese government that I wouldn't do anything tied in with my employment. So I signed it. I don't share Christ because of my employment, though. I mean, you know. So we had some good conversations with some atheists and met with some house church people. I didn't do any official ministry, though. I promise. I've behaved myself. Mostly. Okay. So a tent maker. A tent maker is a Jesus follower called by the Spirit, sent by the church on a mission to expand the kingdom of God by taking or making a job in a gospel-deprived location and doing marketplace ministry. Not merely an expat evangelical. It's not just a Christian living overseas. A tent maker should be viewed as a bivocational missionary. For the majority of church history, this has been the rule, not the exception. If you look in the early church, a lot of them were working, earning their way through. The Apostle Paul did at times, others did. And for about 1,400 years of church history, you don't really have purposeful vocational missionaries. You just have people moving from town to town and sharing the gospel as they went. Then you get the German Pietist movement in the 1600s, and then you get the Great Awakening in 1730, and then you get the Moravians. The beginning of modern missions in the 1730s. What did they do? They went as tent makers. They went as thatchers. They went as wagonsmiths. They did all kinds of things around the world, but they did it as tent makers. In fact, the father of modern missions is William Carey. William Carey wrote this: "We have ever held it to be an essential principle in the conduct of missions that whenever it is practicable, missionaries should support themselves in whole or in part through their own exertions." And if you follow William Carey's life, you realize, yeah, he was doing things with inks and dyes, and he was doing things with shoes, and he was doing things with translation work. He had multiple jobs when he was there in India. So Aquila and Priscilla, for about 18 months, watching Paul and the way things are done, and they observe certain things, and then they start to get involved in bivocational ministry. They're going to move from Corinth to Ephesus and eventually to Rome. So they had watched Paul, the new Jesus followers, start meeting in homes. You see, they start meeting in the home of Titius Justus. They're trying for the synagogue, but they get kicked out, and so they move to a house-based model. Do not despise the house-based model. I'm a little bit of a rebel on this cause. I don't mind church buildings. I know Americans love church buildings. If you love church buildings, you need to stay here. If you're moving overseas, it just seems, I don't know, guys, I'll talk to you this afternoon about these church planting movements in Indonesia and other places. You know, when you talk to somebody and he says, yeah, we got involved in the church planting movement. I mean, I've planted 3 churches, okay, over a 23-year period. So I'm happy. It could be better, I guess. But then I talked to a guy and he's like, yeah, we've been involved in 300 church plants. And I'm like, okay, I'm on a different planet. Where are you from? What did you do? And you find out, well, it was Honduras, it was rural, and it was house church based. Very interesting thing, and it's not intended to get everybody all upset and worked out. I'm not saying buildings are wrong, but I am saying sometimes trappings can trap us. Okay? The early church did not meet in a building designated for church meeting purposes for the first 300 years of church history. Do you understand that? What was America 300 years ago? 300 years is a long time. You go onto Crete and Cyprus and different places, you can't find churches. But what happened was it changed when Rome took over. So I'm just saying, it's interesting that where American missionaries go, we tend to slow things down with our properties and our buildings. Whereas the great church planting movements, as I'll share this afternoon, these guys, a church is a paper cup. You use it for a few weeks. We planted a church in our house, and so many people came to Jesus, we couldn't fit in our house. So we met in 4 other houses. And then we started meeting in our house again. You know, it's like, do you have a church that meets in your house? Yes, it's the 5th church, or the 6th church. And you're like, okay, this is really different. And you start to understand that, I wonder if we're slowing the gospel with our aim at depth and permanency. Just something to think about. So Aquila and Priscilla, they watched Paul do bivocational ministry for 18 months. And Aquila and Priscilla are what we call BAMers. BAMers, business as mission. These guys are people who actually own the business as opposed to just tent makers who get jobs. They believe that business can help accomplish the mission of God in the world, speaking the gospel, modeling the transformation the gospel brings, creating more jobs, adding value to the community. Modern day BAM is not easy. 90% of business startups in America fail. Imagine trying to do it in another culture, in another language. And maybe where corruption is the rule of thumb. So you got to pay this guy and pay this guy in order to even open up your shop. We helped a guy open up a shop in South Africa. We kind of gave him a microloan of $500 to open up a leather shop for, just belts and stuff. And they're like, where did you get the money to open this? Oh, guys loaned me money? No, you have used witchcraft. So they burned it down, and they stole all the stuff and ran away with it. It's like, okay, try doing a business startup in that environment, Not easy. So there are three kinds. We refer to them as job takers, job makers, and job fakers. Be careful, okay? Job takers are tent makers. They are guys who go and get jobs, like Scotty Freeze did in Luxembourg, getting a job with Amazon. He went and took a job. This is what Paul did. He came. His main focus was not really the job. His main focus was ministry. And oftentimes you'll find tent makers getting part-time jobs because they want to do full-time ministry. Then you have job makers. These are guys who go over who actually start businesses. So oftentimes they'll start maybe a computer store or a language center or goats. I met a guy in Indonesia. He set up a scuba and surfing ministry. It's like that millennial missionary video you've seen on YouTube, We're going to reach the scuba divers of Aruba. It's a good one on YouTube. Boy, they do beat millennials up. I love millennials. I mean, gosh, ease up, One thing that millennials hate is labels. It's great when adults get up and say, let's talk about millennials. What were you thinking? Never mind. So, that guy had led, he'd been going at it for about a year and a half. He led about 12 people to Christ. This is in Indonesia on the island of Java. Java's intense. We'll talk about it later. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. Job fakers, be careful. Job fakers are risk takers. These are guys going and saying, I've got a job. I'm starting a company. And you're not really? Like I won't mention what big mission board they were with, but they went into Jordan to start a tractor sales company, like John Deere kind of stuff, big farm tractors. Jordan, okay, like where hardly any grass grows, but, fine. And there were 16 families that were part of this tractor sales thing. Well, the country of Jordan was like, fine, we'll let you in. And they watched them, and after 4 years, they had sold one tractor. So they rounded up all 16 families and said, you're out of here, okay? So be careful. I think, from an ethics standpoint, you need to do what you say you are doing, at least part-time. Maybe very, very little part-time, but at least you're doing it for sure, okay? So if you're following Patrick Lye's model, Paul was a T3 tent maker, if you look that up. So Paul now pulls Aquila and Priscilla with him. He leaves Corinth, and he moves across to Ephesus. That's really cool. That's gutsy. This couple probably up in their 40s, maybe 50s, doesn't mention any kids, but they actually move with Paul. And first person they meet, if you're reading through the passage, so they're coming across the water there from Corinth to Ephesus. First person they meet in the passage is this dude Apollos, really well-polished, great speaker and everything else, but he only knew about the baptism of John. And so it's interesting. They took him aside privately, good people skills. And they both of them, Aquila and Priscilla, instructed the way of God to him more fully, more correctly. So these guys were tent makers, but they had a bit of a theological bite to them as well. They knew and could reason out of the scriptures. So they had been learning from Paul. It's important. Tent makers, we got a guy joining BMW this July. He's an investment portfolio manager. I don't even know this. I hate this kind of math stuff. But he used to manage the investment portfolio for Columbia University in New York. It's like 1.2 billion in assets. That was one of his clients. But he's got 5 kids, and he moved down to Georgia. He went on a vision trip to Indonesia. And I was like, okay, so perfect tent maker, huh? Right? He could totally rock the university world in Indonesia, make all kinds of contacts, business world and everything, teaching financial management, so they can kind of come up to speed because Indonesia feels badly. They're way behind China and they're trying to catch up. But no, God touched his heart and he wants to work with the unreached people groups. So what he did was he and his wife came to our offices a couple weeks ago and they said, can I have your theological exam that you have for all the people applying to the mission? I was like, okay, but you're not coming till July. I know. We need to know what we're going to work on. Our churches said they'll equip us in whatever we need to do. So they took the theology exam. Kind of, in their performance, she was far better than he. But so they went to their pastors and they're like, teach us. So the pastor's like, okay, let's go. So for the next 6 months, why? Well, they've only been in the business world, but they have a heart to change the world with the gospel. But they need equipping. So Aquila and Priscilla had some specialized training working side by side with Paul. So neat thing, you fast forward a couple of years and you see Paul writing. He writes to the church in Corinth. So Paul is in Ephesus writing back to Corinth where they had been with Aquila and Priscilla years earlier. The churches of Asia send you greetings. Aquila and Prisca, together with the church in their house, send you hearty greetings in the Lord. Cool. A couple of years later. So now they're doing it themselves, hosting it in their own house. And then you go fast forward another few years, and Paul, out there writing, he writes to the church in Rome. Okay, this is the book of Romans. If you go to chapter 16, greet Prisca and Aquila, my fellow workers in Christ Jesus, who risked their necks for my life, to whom not only I give thanks, but all the churches of the Gentiles give thanks as well. Greet also the church that is in their house. Neat thing. So these are tent makers. These are people who never went in to vocational missions. These are people who just said, well, take my life, let it be. Consecrated, Lord, to thee. I can serve God with my whole life. I don't care what your major is here. I just know that God can use you if you are committed to follow him wherever he wants you to go. You can move overseas. You guys, that's one thing I love about millennials. It's like those of us with white hair, we used to think, I grew up in New Jersey and I got a job in West Virginia. Whoa, that's like the other side of the world, Well, Jim, he moved to California. I don't think he exists anymore, It was like so far away. Millennials see the world as like, it's all there. I can do that. I can move to China. My daughter grew up in South Africa. Her husband grew up in Brazil, ABWE missionary kid on the Amazon. Last place they want to live is America. So they're working in China, finishing up the year 3. They're thinking maybe they'll go and teach ESL in Japan. Although he's learning Mandarin, so he's wondering if he can. Mandarin is his 5th language. He's 24, and that's his 5th language. He wants to master 7 languages in his lifetime. So they're like, well, we might move to Japan, certainly cleaner. Maybe South Korea, no nukes. Okay, well, maybe, who knows, But they're just, the whole world is their oyster. I could move cross-culturally. I can share the gospel just because I'm a Christian, not because I'm doing this as my main work. Missions isn't just for vocational missionaries anymore. Most American Christians can land a job in 3 to 5 different careers overseas. Options are getting more and more limited. Used to be in China, they wanted us to teach them English. There's still thousands of jobs in that. But now they're saying, accounting? Come teach us accounting in English. Nursing? Teach us nursing in English. We already know English, but teach us skills, tech skills, and so forth. So how might you use your intended career to bring the gospel into dark places? I think as times get darker and borders close, marketplace ministry may be the future. So what I'm saying is, no matter what your major, it's your turn. Don't just say, well, it's those the Bible majors and the missions majors. Those are the people that need to listen during missions conference. Maybe you'll find a place to go. Maybe you'll find something to do with your life. No, it's everybody. It's everybody. The world is changing. The church needs to change with it. So, much to think about. Josh?